Welcome, everyone. Today we're doing a deep dive into a really pivotal part of the world, China's Xinjiang Uighur Autonomous Region.
Right, often called East Turkestan by many.
Exactly. And we want to unpack why this place matters so much. It's huge, first off.
Oh, absolutely massive. About 1/6 of China's entire landmass.
And the location bordering, what is it, 8 different countries?
Key countries, yeah.
Yeah.
Mongolia, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. It's the strategic gateway, really, to Central Asia and even towards the Persian Gulf.
A real crossroads. And it's not just geography, is it? The population mix is complex, too.
Very much so. Around 20 million people, maybe more now, with 13 major ethnic groups. The majority, though, are Uighur Muslims.
People with Central Asian roots, a distinct culture.
Definitely. And, for many Uyghurs, China's control feels like Han Chinese imperial domination. That's a key tension.
So that's our mission today, right? To get into the complexities of China's relationship with Xinjiang, the strategy, the resources, and crucially, the Uyghur population.
Yeah, trying to understand that interplay.
Okay, so China sees Xinjiang as integral. Historical claims are part of it, but what are the current strategic drivers?
Well, the history is definitely part of the narrative Beijing puts forward.
Mm.
But beyond that, you just can't ignore the strategic importance and maybe even more significantly, the natural resources.
The resources. That seems crucial.
It's fundamental. Having control over Xinjiang means having direct access to absolutely vast amounts of natural wealth. It's less about just historical maps and more about, fueling the modern Chinese economy.
Right. So when we say vast wealth, what are we actually talking about? Give us a sense of the scale.
Okay, think about this. Xinjiang holds something like 40% of all of China's coal reserves.
40%? That's staggering.
It is. And it's good quality coal, too low sulfur. So incredibly important for their energy needs.
Wow. Okay, that's just coal. What else?
Well, then you've got oil and gas. Estimates suggest around 22% of China's crude oil reserves are there.
22%.
And about 28% of its natural gas reserves.
Okay, so significant chunks of all the key fossil fuels.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what makes it even more attractive, particularly the oil, is that a lot of it is in shallow basins.
Meaning easier to get out.
Precisely. Easier and cheaper to extract compared to, say, deep offshore drilling. That accessibility is a huge strategic plus.
Gotcha. Are there specific areas like hotspots for this?
Yeah, there are about 17 major oil and gas fields identified. The big names you hear are places like Karamay, the huge Tarim Basin, and the Turvan Basin.
Karamay, I've heard of that one.
Right, Karamay's oil fields are some of the biggest producers in the whole country. It really highlights the scale we're dealing with.
So fuels are covered, but I imagine there's more under the ground than just oil, gas, and coal.
Oh, definitely. It's rich in all sorts of minerals. You've got extensive deposits of silver, copper, lead, nitrates, gold, zinc. The list goes on.
Gold, too.
Yeah, there's a pretty major discovery announced a while back in Xinjiang County. A gold mine estimated to hold, get this, 53 tons of gold.
53 tons. What's that worth?
Billions of US dollars.
Yeah.
Easily over $3 billion. And that same deposit had something like 31,000 tons of copper, too.
Incredible. So it's just this treasure trove that's become more and more important as China modernized.
Absolutely. The economic boom post-Mao really accelerated the exploitation of these resources.
Which logically leads to the next question. How do you get all this stuff out and to where it's needed, like the coast?
Infrastructure. Massive, massive infrastructure projects. China has built this incredibly complex network of pipelines crisscrossing Xinjiang.
Right. Pipelines carrying resources both from Xinjiang itself and from Central Asia through Xinjiang.
Exactly. Connecting those Western resources, both domestic and imported, to the big industrial centers in the East. It's the artery system.
Can you give us an example? What's the main one?
The poster child really is the East-West pipeline. It starts way out in the Tarim Basin at the Lunan oil fields.
Okay.
And it stretches clear across China, something like 15 provinces, all the way to Shanghai.
How long is that?
Nearly 8,704 kilometers. It's actually the world's longest natural gas pipeline.
The world's longest. That's a serious statement of intent.
It really is. Shows the scale of investment and commitment.
Are there other major ones feeding into this or branching off?
Yeah, there are several important peripheral lines. You've got the Zhejiangwu pipeline sending gas towards Sichuan. There's the Shanxi-Beijing pipeline, obviously crucial for the capital.
Mm-hmm.
And they've even extended the East-West system down to Hong Kong, starting around 2013.
Okay. Any other big projects?
Well, there's a really ambitious one called the SNG pipeline. SNG stands for synthetic natural gas.
So making gas from coal.
Exactly. Leveraging Xinjiang's huge coal reserves. This pipeline is designed to run almost 8,400 kilometers, carrying about 30 billion cubic meters of this synthetic gas per year to Xinjiang and Guangdong, major industrial hubs.
Wow, so Xinjiang is this energy corridor inside China.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But its role extends beyond China's borders, too. For the Central Asian China gas pipeline, the CECGP, that's huge.
Where does that one run?
It basically starts near the Turkmenistan-Uzbekistan border at a place called Gdaim. Then it runs through Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan and terminates in Horgoz, which is in Xinjiang.
Bringing gas in from Central Asia.
A lot of gas. Right now, there are 3 parallel lines running, with a combined capacity of around 30 billion cubic meters annually.
And China's heavily invested.
Increasingly so. They hold nearly a 50% stake now, and there are already plans for a 4th pipeline.
So what's the strategic upshot of all these pipelines, both internal and external?
It massively boosts China's energy security. It reduces their reliance on, say, seaborne imports of coal from Australia or oil from the Persian Gulf, which have to travel through potentially unstable areas or choke points like the Malacca Straits.
Gives them more direct control and shorter routes?
Exactly. It diversifies their supply and routes.
Okay, so energy is clearly paramount, but you mentioned Xinjiang's importance isn't just underground. What about water?
Right. Water is another critical piece.
Yeah.
Xinjiang has a surprising number of rivers, around 570, plus hundreds of mountain springs.
Where does that water go?
Many of the major river systems, think the Ili, the Erkisi, the Kaidu, the Yarkun rivers, they originate in Xinjiang's mountains and flow eastwards into mainland China.
Ah, so like Tibet, it's a vital water source for the rest of the country.
Precisely. It plays a really significant role in China's overall water security and consequently its food security too, supplying fresh water to the more arid and populated regions downstream.
Okay, so we've got this strategically vital region packed with resources, water, acting as an energy corridor with massive infrastructure built up. But this comes at a cost, doesn't it? Especially for the local population, the Uyghurs.
Yes, that's the other side of the coin. All this development, resource extraction, infrastructure building, it has brought economic activity and arguably some level of overall prosperity to Xinjiang. But the benefits haven't been evenly distributed. Far from it. The lion's share seems to have gone to the massive influx of Han Chinese migrants who've moved into the region, often facilitated by the state.
You mentioned the demographic shift earlier. Can you put some numbers on that?
It's dramatic. Back in 1949, Han Chinese were maybe 6.7% of Xinjiang's population.
Less than 7%.
Right. By 2008, that figure had jumped to 40%, and by 2012, you had about 8.5 million Han Chinese living there, alongside roughly 10.5 million Uyghurs, out of a total population then of over 22 million, which includes Kazakhs, Uyghurs, Kyrgyz, and others too.
40% Han Chinese. That's a huge change in just a few decades.
It is. And critically, these Han migrants often seem to get the better jobs, the better positions in businesses, especially state-linked enterprises run by the Chinese Communist Party.
Creating resentment.
Absolutely. A widespread feeling among Uyghurs and other minorities of being economically marginalized in their own homeland.
And this economic friction, combined with the sheer number of new arrivals, led to trouble.
Yes. It was a major factor behind the widespread rioting and unrest that started simmering and then broke out in the 1990s. Add to that restrictions on Uyghur culture, language, and religious practices.
Like what, for instance?
Well, things like, back in the 90s, banning public servants from participating in Ramadan iftar meals. Or in 1997, reports of arrests of young Muslim men just for attending religious ceremonies. These kinds of things fueled a sense of injustice.
And the breakup of the Soviet Union nearby probably played a role.
Definitely. Seeing neighboring Central Asian states gain independence likely emboldened separatist feelings among some Uyghurs. Demands for basic rights and greater autonomy grew louder.
How did Beijing respond to the unrest?
Forcefully. There were brutal crackdowns by the People's Liberation Army. Reports included public executions, reminiscent of the Mao era, really designed to quash dissent.
Any specific incidents stand out?
The Gulja incident in 1997 is often cited. Thousands protested against religious restrictions and arrests. The government response was harsh, leading to many casualties and arrests. It really deepened the sense of grievance.
And this kind of heavy-handed response, it often backfires, doesn't it? Leading to more extreme reactions.
Sadly, yes. The late 90s saw an uptick in violence and what China calls terrorism within Xinjiang. This continued sporadically and then escalated significantly again in around 2014-15 with incidents like mass stabbings.
It's such a fraught situation. You hear the term ETIM, East Turkestan Islamic Movement, designated as a terror group.
Right, the U.S. and UN did designate ETIM, but it's complex. Some human rights groups argue that focusing solely on the terror label ignores the legitimate grievances and, frankly, the severe human rights violations faced by Uyghurs, which might push some towards violence out of desperation. They'd say the dissent is justified.
So let's talk more about these separatist groups. How did they emerge?
Well, as we discussed, the combination of the crackdowns and the feeling of being shut out economically led some Uyghurs, particularly in the 90s, to look for support elsewhere. Some ended up in neighboring Afghanistan and Pakistan, connecting with groups like al-Qaeda.
And groups formed specifically focused on Xinjiang.
Yes, various Uyghur separatist groups emerged then, carrying out attacks within Xinjiang. ETIM became perhaps the most well-known.
What was their stated goal?
Their aim, publicly at least, was to establish an independent state, East Turkestan, governed by Sharia law. That's obviously fundamentally opposed to Beijing's rule.
Were there verified links to international networks like al-Qaeda?
There were reports, particularly from Russian media around 2001, suggesting Osama bin Laden had held a meeting back in '99 in Afghanistan.
With whom?
Representatives from the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, the IMU, and also ETIM. The reports claimed an agreement was made for funding and support. Kyrgyz security sources seemed to corroborate some kind of collaboration later on.
And this contributed to the terror designation.
Yes, those alleged links were a key factor in the U.S. and the UN Security Council banning ETIM as a terrorist organization. Pakistani officials have also at times admitted connections between militants in Western China and groups active in Afghanistan and Pakistan, like the Pakistan Taliban.
Has ETIM stayed the same organization?
It seems to have evolved. It later rebranded, or parts of it did, as the Turkestan Islamic Party, or TIP.
And their connections.
TIP is reported to have maintained links with al-Qaeda and, more recently, also developed ties with ISIS, particularly with fighters going to Syria and Iraq.
So the conflicts in the Middle East and Afghanistan have had knock-on effects in Xinjiang.
Absolutely. The whole regional security picture is interconnected. The Afghan jihad years ago, the rise of the Taliban, the emergence of ISIS, and its collaboration with Central Asian groups like the IMU, all of these present new or renewed challenges for China's control over Xinjiang.
Any specific examples of this reach?
Well, the 2015 bombings in Bangkok were linked by Thai authorities to Uyghurs, some apparently holding Turkish passports. This raised questions about international networks and Turkey's role, which some see as a potential transit point or even source for jihadists.
And geographically, is there a particular vulnerability?
The Wakhan corridor in Afghanistan is often mentioned. It's that narrow strip bordering Xinjiang. It's seen as a potential weak point, a possible route for militants or insurgents to try and infiltrate.
Okay, so it's a mix of internal resentment fueled by very real issues, but also these external jihadi influences and potentially state actors playing a role.
It seems that way. You have the genuine grievances of ethnic Uyghurs about cultural repression, economic marginalization. That's undeniable. But then you also have the activities of external organizations.
Like the World Uyghur Congress.
Right, the WC. They're based mainly in Washington, D.C. and Munich, and they've been very effective in bringing international attention to the Uyghur situation, framing it as Chinese repression and exploitation, and advocating for separatism.
Have they received external support?
There are reports, often highlighted by Chinese state media but also documented elsewhere, that organizations like the U.S.-based National Endowment for Democracy, or NED, have provided funding.
NED?
Yes, the National Endowment for Democracy. Estimates suggest they've given the WC something like $215,000 annually for activities related to human rights advocacy and promoting democracy.
And NED has funded other groups globally.
Yes. NED has a long history of funding pro-democracy and civil society groups in many different countries, sometimes controversially.
There's a prominent leader, Rabia Kadir.
Yes, Ms. Rabia Kadir. She became a leading voice. She was elected president of the Uighur American Association and then the WC back in 2006.
And she became a focal point for China's criticism.
Very much so. After violent clashes erupted in Xinjiang in July 2006, the regional government in Xinjiang publicly blamed her, she was living in the U.S. by then, for inciting the violence and linked her to terrorist acts.
Did she deny that?
Vehemently, yes. She always maintained her advocacy was peaceful, but she definitely had support from the U.S. government. President George W. Bush met with her in 2007 and even publicly called on China to release members of her family who were detained.
So this international attention put pressure on China.
It certainly did. China's handling of the protests and the subsequent crackdown drew widespread international criticism, not just from the West, but also from countries like Turkey and organizations like the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, but still connected. Xinjiang isn't just about internal issues or even just regional security. It's absolutely central to China's biggest global project, isn't it? The Belt and Road Initiative.
Absolutely critical. You cannot understand the Belt and Road, or OBR, as it was first known, without understanding Xinjiang's role. Its location makes it the indispensable land bridge.
The gateway we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. All these economic corridors aiming to revive the old Silk Road routes connecting China to Central Asia, the Middle East, Europe. They have to transit through Xinjiang.
We're seeing practical examples of this already.
Oh, yeah. Think about the train route that opened up connecting China directly to Tehran in Iran. That's part of this grand vision. The ultimate aim is to have efficient land routes linking China all the way to Europe and Russia, largely via Central Asia.
And it's also about securing alternative routes, isn't it? Particularly for energy.
Precisely.
Yeah.
We talked about reducing reliance on sea lanes. China is highly motivated to secure a reliable land route to the Persian Gulf through Central Asia and Pakistan.
Which brings us to CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor.
Exactly. CPEC is arguably the flagship project of the Belt and Road. It aims to connect Kashgar in Xinjiang via the Karakoram Highway, which runs through Pakistan-administered Kashmir down to the deepwater port of Gwadar in Balochistan, Pakistan.
So a direct link from Xinjiang to the Arabian Sea.
That's the plan. A direct land route linking Xinjiang with the Persian Gulf region. This gives China that crucial alternative energy supply route, bypassing the Malacca Straits entirely.
So when you combine CPEC with the pipelines we discussed, like the CACGP from Turkmenistan,
You see Xinjiang emerge as this absolutely vital hub, this gateway for China's expanding economic reach and geopolitical influence across Central Asia, Eurasia, and towards the Persian Gulf. It connects everything.
it really paints a picture of a region under immense pressure, caught between internal conflict and these huge geopolitical and economic forces. What does the future look like?
It's fraught with challenges, certainly.
Right.
Xinjiang, maybe even more so than Tibet, is a potential flashpoint for China.
Why more so?
Those long, often remote borders with so many countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Russia, it makes it inherently more permeable, perhaps, to external influences or instability compared to Tibet's geography.
And as China's global ambitions grow,
As China pushes harder for resources and global influence through projects like the Belt and Road, the stakes in Xinjiang get even higher. Maintaining stability there becomes paramount, but the methods used could continue to fuel resentment.
is there a risk of external powers trying to stir the pot?
That's always a possibility Beijing worries about. The idea that foreign powers, maybe the U.S. or others, could covertly support separatist movements to destabilize China or counter its rise is a persistent concern for them.
And the internal dynamics, the demographics, the repression.
That dynamic, the increasing Han population, the reports of intense surveillance, cultural assimilation policies, the re-education camps, it risks creating even more alienation among Uyghurs, and that could potentially generate more sympathy or even active support for the East Turkestan cause in neighboring Muslim-majority countries.
Could other regional powers try to use this? You mentioned India earlier.
It's certainly talked about in strategic circles. The idea of India playing the Uyghur card as a counterweight to China's actions on its own borders or its influence in South Asia.
Has there been any sign of that?
Well, there was that incident recently where some prominent Chinese dissidents, including a representative from the World Uyghur Congress, visited Dharamshala in India and met with the Dalai Lama.
Dharamshala, the seat of the Tibetan government in exile.
Exactly. And Beijing's reaction was immediate and very strong. It shows just how sensitive they are to any perceived international support for either the Tibetan or the Uyghur causes, especially if it involves India.
So it seems how China navigates this complex situation in Xinjiang and also in Tibet could really be a determining factor for its larger global dreams.
I think that's fair to say. Managing the deep-seated dissent and the complex ethnic and political situation in these strategically vital, resource-rich regions is a massive, ongoing challenge that could significantly impact China's trajectory on the world stage.
Okay, so let's try and pull the threads together from this deep dive. We've looked at Xinjiang's strategic position, absolutely critical. Its incredible natural resource wealth, coal, oil, gas, minerals, water.
The massive infrastructure built to exploit and transport those resources, both within China and from Central Asia, The pipelines, the railways, CPEC,
Then the demographic shifts, the huge influx of Han Chinese, and the resulting economic and cultural tensions with the native Uyghur population.
leading to unrest, harsh crackdowns, the rise of separatist movements like ETIM and TIP, and the complex issue of terrorism and external jihadi links.
We also touched on the role of international advocacy groups like the WC, potential external funding, and the geopolitical implications, especially concerning the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah, Xinjiang is absolutely indispensable for the BRI's land routes.
And at the core of it all, as you said earlier, is this fundamental tension.
Right. China's undeniable need, from its perspective, for Xinjiang's resources and strategic location versus the very real grievances, the cultural identity, and the aspirations of the Uyghur people.
It's a powerful dynamic. So maybe a final thought for our listeners to chew on. Given everything we've discussed, the internal pressures, the resource scramble, the geopolitical significance, how do you think the ongoing situation in Xinjiang might ripple outwards? How could it shape not just China's own future, but the stability and the very interconnectedness of that whole vast region of Central Asia and beyond?
Yeah.
What are the long-term lessons here about development, resources, ethnic minorities, and international relations in such a vital part of the world?